In our previous lecture we were discussing about the derivations of the Navier-Stokes equation. Now what we will do in this lecture, we will work out some exact solutions of the Navier-Stokes equation. As we discussed, the Navier-Stokes equation is not a very simple equation to solve in principle, because these are nonlinear coupled partial differential equations, but in certain simple cases exact solutions are there. That means one may analytically solve the Navier-Stokes equation, and it is possible to work out some of those solutions in a very using very simple mathematics, and that we will do in this elementary course. We will not go into the details of all possible cases where exact solutions of Navier-Stokes equations exist, but certain very simple elementary cases which fall within the domain of an introductory course in fluid mechanics. So if we try to revisit that, what was the form that we derived for the Navier-Stokes equation. So we derived this particular form. So this particular form was for a special case. Can you remember what is the special case? Incompressible flow, and what are the other assumptions? Okay, let us put a body force maybe to make it a bit more general. So the assumptions are incompressible flow, because if it was a compressible flow, there is a term which is associated with the divergence of a velocity vector, that particular term would appear. Then Newtonian and Stokesian fluid, homogeneous and isotropic. So those were there for the original derivations, and with the additional incompressibility constraint, this is the form of the equation that we derived. Up to this we did in the previous lecture. And why this incompressible form is important is because like whatever exact solutions we will be deriving in this course will be only for incompressible flows. So from now onwards, whatever exact solutions we will be deriving, we will not explicitly mention time and again that it is incompressible flow, but you just keep in mind that that is the assumption that we are following for the remaining derivations. Now it is also not a bad idea to write this in terms of a vector form, because this form when you write in terms of the indices I and j, this is an elegant form, but this we wrote in terms of Cartesian index notations. But if you have a curvilinear coordinate system, or the most general case of maybe a non-orthogonal curvilinear coordinate system, then for all those cases these types of index notation in this form will not work. You require a different form, because these are Cartesian index notations. But you may have different coordinate systems, but vector form is general. So if we write its equivalent vector form, then that vector form will be valid independent of the coordinate system. So if you want to write it in a vector form, so let us say we are interested to write it for a velocity component, say ui. So the next term, if you want to write in terms of the vector, say this is the velocity vector, so we are just writing one component, we will then write the other component. So we have only written one of the terms in vector form, the other terms we have still retained in the original index notation. So this is the ith component. So we should remember that I equal to 1 will imply x component, I equal to 2 will imply y component, I equal to 3 will imply the z component. So what we will do, that this for I equal to 1, this is x component, so we will take the x component and then multiply that x component with I cap, then I equal to 2, that will be y component, multiply that with j cap, the unit vector, corresponding unit vector. Similarly I equal to 3 will multiply with k cap and add those together. So if we add those together, then what will be the corresponding form? So rho, this will be partial derivative with respect to time u1i plus u2j plus u3k. So that will become the velocity vector u, right. Similarly this will become minus gradient of p okay. Just like taking the individual components and finding the resultant. So this also, as we have seen in the previous notation, in terms of the total derivative, this may be written in terms of d dt of capital D dt of u. So this vector form is important and we will use this vector form for some of the cases, and where one coordinate system differs from the other is the del operator is differently expressed in different coordinate systems, and that is how expressions when written in terms of the coordinates of the coordinate system will differ from one system to the other, somewhere x y z, somewhere r theta z, somewhere r theta phi, depends on the coordinate system that you are using, but where all those coordinates appear will be in terms of the del operator, because del operator has different expressions for different coordinate systems, but when you write it generically in terms of del operator, it is independent of the coordinate system that you are writing, and that is one of the good things about this form. Now we will start with the exact solutions for a case where we will come down to a much more simplified version of this particular form, and that first exact solution, so exact solution 1, we will consider something called as fully developed flow between two parallel plates. This has a technical name, it is known as plane Poiseuille flow. So we will look into this special case. First we will draw a sketch to understand that what is the specific form that we are looking for of the Navier-Stokes equation in this case. Here we can very elegantly use the Cartesian index notation, because the coordinate system inherent to this description is a Cartesian one. So the understanding is that you have two parallel plates. So let us say that you have a plate, top plate, and you have a bottom plate. These plates are separated by a gap may be large or small or whatever, and these plates are such that the dimensions in this plane are much smaller than the dimension perpendicular to this plane. That means you have a plate like this, so one plate like this, another plate parallel to this, where the third dimension is like infinity, very large. So the dimension perpendicular to the plane of the board is much larger in comparison to the dimensions in the plane of the board. So it makes the problem equivalently a two dimensional problem. Why? Because if the third dimension is very large, then the gradients in the third dimension are very small, because gradients are basically change in variable divided by the length over which the change takes place. If the length scale in the third dimension is very large, then the characteristic changes in terms of the gradients are very small, and then the effect of the third dimension may be neglected. So if we have let us say that we give certain dimensions, let us say this is the center line of the channel. So this height is say h, this height is h, let us say that the length of the plate is, each plate is L, and the width is W, such that W is much greater than 2h. So, when you come in terms of the cross section, the effect of the H in terms of creating the gradient is much more important than the effect of the dimension W, that is the width. Okay. Now, let us try to first understand that physically what happens, because we have a keyword fully developed flow which we have not yet explained. So, we will try to explain that keyword or collection of keywords through understanding that physically what goes on. So, if you have say a fluid flow entering the channel, say with a uniform velocity, somehow let us say that there is a uniform free stream and that enters the channel. So, just think that the channel constitutes of two parallel plates, and for the time being forget about two plates, just consider that you have one plate. So, if you consider that you have one plate, then what happens? You will see that because of the effect of the plate, the boundary layer starts growing. We have discussed about this earlier. So, let us say that from this point the boundary layer starts growing and it grows like this. Why does the boundary layer grow? Let us just recapitulate very briefly that you have the no slip boundary condition at the wall. So, the effect of the wall is that it brings the fluid to rest at that point, and because of the viscosity of the fluid, this effect is propagated towards the outer fluid. So, the fluid elements which are very close to the wall feel the effect of the wall the strongest, and then the fluid elements which are further and further away from the wall will feel some effect of the wall, but not as strong, because they are also being pulled by a fluid element on the other side which is moving faster, and further and further away from the wall you go, you feel that the fluid elements which are more and more away from the wall will feel the effect of the wall much less, and we will come to a height beyond which the effect of the wall is not felt at all. That means viscosity is not capable enough of creating further velocity gradient, and that means we have come to a state where beyond that the velocity profile is virtually uniform, and that location at each and every point at each and every section is given by a height which is some distance from the wall. Depending on how speedy the incoming flow is, this distance will be small or large. If it is a high speed flow, this distance will be very small. If it is a low speed flow, this distance will be large, and we will come into the details of the largeness or smallness of estimation of this when we study in details the boundary layer theory in one of our subsequent chapters. But like here we are interested more in terms of qualitative terms, that what is happening. So, if you draw a velocity profile, let us try to draw a velocity profile at two different sections. Let us say that we draw it at one of the sections which is relatively closer to the inlet, let us say this is section 1, and we draw it at a section which is section 2, which is bit further away from the inlet. So, at the section 1 if we draw the velocity profile, see the velocity will have a gradient till you come to the edge of the boundary layer, then the velocity will be uniform. You have to keep in mind that on the other side there is a plate which has perfect geometrical similarity and physical similarity, that means boundary condition here is no slip, here also it is no slip. So, whatever will happen at the bottom plate, there is nothing which makes us believe that same thing will not happen at the top plate. So, same thing will happen at the top plate, and there will be a symmetrical development of the boundary layer. So, the understanding of the boundary layer is that within the boundary layer, so the red line is the edge of the boundary layer, below that you are having velocity gradients because of the viscous effects, outside that velocity gradients are not there. It does not mean that the viscosity is 0, but velocity gradients are simply not there, that means effect of the wall has not propagated beyond that point. Now, if you draw the velocity profile at the other end also, it will be very symmetrical to what it was at the bottom end, and then it will be uniform outside the boundary layer. So, say this is the velocity profile. Now, let us try to draw the velocity profile at a section 2. So, when you draw the velocity profile at a section 2, so the effect of the wall will be felt now to a greater distance from the wall, because the fluid has now suffered greater effect of the wall by virtue of propagating deeper and deeper into the channel. Before drawing the velocity profile of the section 2, if we focus our attention on the velocity profile for the section 1, we see that it is divided into two parts. One is the boundary layer region and another is outside the boundary layer region, which we call as a core region. Okay. So, this is what you have for a core region and the boundary layer region. Now, similarly at section 2, there will be some core region is now thinner and boundary layer region is now thicker. So, the first question that we will like to ask ourselves is, whatever is the velocity at the core region at section 1, say it is uc1, and let us say that the velocity at the core region for the section 2 is uc2. Question is uc1 greater than uc2, is it less than uc2 or is it equal to uc2? So, we will try to answer this logically, not by a guesswork. So, let us try to do that. To do that, you have to understand that let us consider that we are assuming that it is a steady flow. So, over each cross section the same flow rate is there, that means flow rate at section 1 is same as flow rate at section 2. When we say flow rate, it is usually mass flow rate, but if the density is taken as a constant, it is as good as volume flow rate. So, volume flow rate, how it is obtained? By integrating the velocity profile over the cross section, that gives the volume flow rate. So, if you integrate the velocity profile over the cross section and it remains constant for sections 1 and 2, then what is the feature of section 2? See, at section 2 you have now a greater distance from the wall that is suffering the effect of the wall. So, the effect of the wall is now felt to a greater distance, both top and bottom, because they are symmetrical. That means if the boundary layer was not growing in terms of its size or thickness, then whatever was the extent to which the fluid is slowed down, now the extent to which the fluid is slowed down is more, and to compensate for that, the fluid in the core region should move faster than the whatever it used to move for the section 1, to keep the integral of the velocity same for both sections 1 and 2. So, here simply you have a greater distance over which the fluid has suffered greater resistance, it has to compensate for that with a higher velocity in the core to have the integral of the velocity over the section conserved, that is the flow rate conserved. Okay. So, that means the first understanding is you have uc2 greater than uc1. Okay. Now, the question is, if you have uc2 greater than uc1, then what about the pressures at sections 1 and 2? So, when you are having a velocity and when you are trying to relate that with pressure, you are very much tempted with use of Bernoulli's equation, right. So, we have to see that whether the Bernoulli's equation here is applicable or not. So, let us say that we consider a streamline along the center line, and the streamline is connecting say two points A and B located on the center line. A is a point on section 1 and B is a point on section 2, both along the center line, and that is one of the streamlines because of the symmetry. Now, can you apply the Bernoulli's equation between A and B? See, there are many assumptions of Bernoulli's equation, but the first assumption that you should look for, that is it a inviscid flow or a viscous flow, then look for all other things, because if the first question is not satisfied, then you should not look for any other thing, because you cannot apply it for a case where viscous effects are there. The interesting thing is that here the flow is what? Flow is viscous flow because it has viscosity, but effect of viscosity is not felt here because you do not have a velocity gradient, so you have no rate of deformation, and the shear stress is the viscosity times the rate of deformation. So, if the rate of deformation is 0, it does not matter whether viscosity exists or not. So, in terms of feeling the shear stress, it is there is no shear stress here, and that means it is like an inviscid flow. So, effect of the wall has not propagated into the center line. So, that means you may apply Bernoulli's equation between A and B, provided other assumptions of Bernoulli's equation are also justified. So, like you may use the steady version by assuming that it is a steady flow, and incompressible, a special case of incompressible, here we are considering a constant density flow. So, when you write the Bernoulli's equation between A and B, you have Pa by rho plus U A square by 2. Let us say that A and B are so close that the difference in height between these two is not important. So, just it is same as Pb by rho plus Ub square by 2, and we know from this analysis that Ub is greater than Ua. Therefore, Pb is less than Pa. If you are not happy by assuming that A and B are of the same height, and you have all the right not to feel happy, because you might have a vertical parallel plate like this. So, if you have vertical parallel plate and you are considering 2 points, say A and B on the center line, yes, there is every chance that no matter like whatever distance you go, it is a vertical change. So, it is a total vertical change, and it may be quite substantial depending on where are the points A and B. So, if you still consider that, well, I am considering A and B which may be located at different heights. So, you add even G into, we use a coordinate system like H, because x, y, z we have preserved for different coordinate. So, this plus so we may say that in terms of writing it not just by pressure, but if we write it as Pa plus rho G H A divided by rho plus Ua square by 2, that we can write Pb plus rho G H B by rho plus Ub square by 2. We have discussed earlier that the equivalent pressure that we have as pressure plus the effect of the gravitational head together is known as the piezometric pressure. So, here what we have written is the piezometric pressure. So, we call it, we will give it a symbol Pa star, okay. We give it a symbol Pa star and we give it a symbol Pb star. So, when we write it in terms of piezometric pressure, the good thing is that it becomes independent of the orientation of the channel, that we come to a conclusion that yes, in terms of piezometric pressure we should have Pb star less than Pa star, right. And when we are writing this, see, for a parallel plate channel which is horizontal or maybe having an inclination with the vertical which is slight, then this rho G H effect is not important, and then it is straight away giving Pb less than Pa. But if the height effect, the difference in height between 2 points, that is important, then it is P star or the piezometric pressure effect that is going to be important. So, from here we may conclude one important thing, that the flow is taking from higher piezometric pressure to lower piezometric pressure, right, from A to B. So, question is, that means there is a driving pressure gradient from the point where the fluid is flowing to the point where the fluid is flowing, which is giving this pressure gradient. So, you must have a driving device which is allowing the fluid to have this pressure gradient so that it can maintain the flow, because why it requires a pressure gradient? See, it has to accelerate along the chord, its velocity should increase along the chord. So, there must be a driving force which should make it accelerate, and that is a driving piezometric pressure gradient from a higher pressure gradient to lower pressure gradient. Physically what may provide that? You may have a pump that provides that pressure gradient. So, you must have an energizing mechanism. It need not necessarily be a pump, but you must have something which energizes the fluid so that it may have an acceleration along the core, and that is also one of the important technical or technological understanding that what is the consequence of what happens in the core. Then the important thing for our exact solution of the Navier-Stokes equation is that the fluid in the or the boundary layers which are there in the region where the boundary layers are developing, the edges of the boundary layer, because they are symmetric, when they meet at the center line somewhere. What happens beyond this is something which is interesting. So if you draw a velocity profile here, from our previous discussions we may conclude that whatever is the velocity of the center line here, that is the maximum of all, because the fluid is continuously accelerating. So it comes to a maximum velocity here, and at the wall the velocity is 0, and you get a sort of velocity profile. Question is, will this velocity profile change any further as you move away from this? See, what makes the velocity profile change is as follows. In the region which is towards the left of this section, the boundary layer is continuously growing. So there is an adjustment at each and every section to keep the flow rate unaltered, and that depends on the extent to which the wall effect has propagated into the fluid. Here the wall effect has propagated fully into the fluid. That means the center line also now knows, yes, there is a wall and I am feeling the effect of the wall, because like the edge of boundary layer is now limitingly on the center line. But beyond this, what happens? Beyond this there is no change, because now the entire fluid knows that what is the effect of the wall, and it responds to that in the same way. There is no further development of the boundary layer. So we say that the flow has become fully developed. When there is fully developed, there is something which is not fully developed, and that is known as a developing flow. So the region which is here is known as a developing flow. Basically the boundary layers are developing here, and it is also known as an entrance region. These are just different names. So you have an entrance region and you have a fully developed region, and the hallmark of the fully developed region is that now if you draw velocity profile at different sections, let us say that you draw velocity profile at a section somewhere else, then these velocity profiles would be just identical. These are the same. What it means? It means that if you are considering that u as the velocity component along x, now u becomes function of y only. What are our x and y coordinates? Let us set up x and y coordinates as this as x and this as y, or you may write partial derivative of u with respect to x equal to 0, because only variation of u is with respect to y. See, fundamentally u could be function of, in this coordinate system, functions of x, y, z and time. We have considered first assumption is steady flow. So you have any partial derivative with respect to time of any flow property or velocity, that is 0. So it could be function of x, y and z. The gradients with respect to z are approximately 0, because you are considering infinitely large width in the z direction. So you have, so width is much larger than say 2h, and that means z direction is along the width, so you have this equal to 0. So when you have used these assumptions to begin with, you had only two choices possible, or rather two dependencies possible. U could be dependent on x and y. Now because of treating it as a fully developed flow, so we are now going to our analysis only that is valid in the fully developed region. So you have u not a function of x. So fully developed flow will mean it is only for u. For example, p varies also, this is x, right. For example, p varies with x. So here we have written for any variable, but here only for u, not for p, that you have to keep in mind. So with these assumptions you come to a conclusion that yes, u therefore is a function of y only. So the partial derivatives all with respect to u with respect to y will now soon boil down to ordinary derivatives of u with respect to y, because it is just a function of y.